lecture. Okay, so let me then begin. So yesterday we introduced the basic notion of Riemannian manifolds, okay, and the tensors on the Riemannian manifold. In particular, at the end we mentioned rank PQ tensor, which I denoted by C I on to IP, G on to JQ. And the property of this tensor under a general coordinate transformation is of the following form. So C prime I1 to IP, G1 to JQ, X prime was given by del K1 Okay, so this is the way a rank PQ tensor transforms. And there are some special cases of this which are simply absent. So rank 00 means that the prime phi prime, so suppose if you have a scalar phi, then phi prime of x prime is equal to phi of x. Very simple transformation of rank 10 is what we call a contravariant vector. And 01 will be a covariant vector. Okay, and you already introduced the notion of 0p will be contravariant tensor and 1p0 will be contravariant tensor and 0q will be contravariant covariant tensor. Now, given a set of tensor fields, we can construct other tensors out of this. For example, suppose we have two tensors, A I1 to IP, J1 to JQ, B K1 to KS, KR, K1 to LS. Okay, so each of these are constructed out of metric and its derivative, and each transforms as a tensor, okay, by definition. Then this product, it's very easy to see that this transforms as a rank P plus R Q plus S tensor. Is this statement here? Okay, and the derivation is straightforward, right? Because this transforms with a set of factors like this transforms with a set of factors like this. So to take the product, you just get a product of this set of factors. A slightly more non-trivial statement is the following. So again, suppose A is a rank PQ tensor. Now consider the following object: I1, I2 to IP, I1, J2, J3 to JQ. So what have we done here? We had a rank PQ tensor would have been A I1 I2 up to IP, J1 J2 up to JQ. Now I have said J1 equal to I1, and because it's repeated index, it's summed over automatically. So this quantity is a rank Q minus 1 tensor. Okay, the indices of this are I2 to IP and J2 to JQ. Okay, I1 is summed over. So is this clear how to prove this?
Write down the transformation equation which the chain will be cancelled.
Yeah, so basically what happens is that, so let's look at, see, I2 to IP, J2 to JQ, let's forget. So let's consider this object, A I1, I1. Suppose you have a rank 1 tensor. Okay, and you consider A I1, I1. So let's look at how it transforms. So A prime I1 of X prime. From this we see that this transforms as K1 X prime I1 del prime I1 X L1 of X. Right? That's from this definition. I just picked up del K1 X prime I1, and here, okay, because J1 is the same as I1, okay, I just wrote del prime I1 of XL1. Okay, AK1, L1. The other indices, if they are there, they will be there, and then their transformation laws will be accordingly. Okay, they will not interfere with whatever you are doing here. Now, what is this object? Okay, this is, let me write it, expand it out. Del X prime I1, del X K1, del X L1, del X prime I1. Okay, that's what this means. But now by chain rule, you see that this is nothing but del X L1, del X K1, which is delta L1 K1. So the right hand side becomes, so delta L1 K1, this allows us to set L1 equal to K1 and sum over K1. So it just becomes A K1 K1 X. Okay, this is exactly the way rank 00 tensor should transform. Okay, phi prime of X prime is equal to phi of X. Is this okay?
The last line.
This line?
Can you avoid writing exactly?
Oh, in the last line. Okay. Okay, I'll try to do that.
So when we are writing A I1 equal to this transformation law, we are already assuming it's sum over I1 or just?
Yes, that's right. So any time index is repeated, we'll assume that it's already summed over I1, summed over that index. Okay, that is the conventional VOC. So if a repeated index is not summed over, then that will be mentioned specifically, right? That it's not summed over. Otherwise, it's always understood to be summed over. Okay. Now, why are tensors useful? Okay. Tensors are useful because they allow us to distinguish between different Riemannian manifolds. Because we discussed yesterday that given two manifolds, okay, which may have computed a different metric, but it's not easy to see by just by looking at those two metrics whether they are the same or not, because there could be a coordinate transformation that takes one metric to another metric. But imagine that we construct some tensor out of that metric, okay, and then we find that in one manifold the tensor vanishes, in the other one it doesn't. Then we know that those two manifolds cannot be equal, they cannot be related by coordinate transformation, because if a tensor vanishes, right, a tensor vanishing means all its components vanish. Okay, if the tensor vanishes, okay, so imagine that suppose this is 0, okay, then the tensor transformation law tells us that in the new coordinate system also it will vanish, right? Because these are just multiplicative factors. If all of these components vanish, then it will vanish in the new coordinate system also. So if a tensor is 0 in one manifold and not 0 in the other manifold, okay, we know that these two manifolds are not related by coordinate transformation. Is this clear? Okay. Scalars are even more useful, okay, because for scalars you don't even have these factors, okay, so you can directly compare and see if the two manifolds can be equal or not. So now then the goal is to see whether you can use this approach to try to distinguish between different manifolds. Okay, so for this you have to first find tensors. Okay, and then we will see how to distinguish between different manifolds using those tensors. So the first tensor that we know of is the metric itself. Okay, metric, as we saw, is a rank 2 covariant tensor. So you can ask, given the knowledge of the metric, okay, we already have a tensor, okay, and can you use it to distinguish between two different manifolds? Unfortunately, it turns out that the metric tensor is not particularly useful in distinguishing between different manifolds. Because metric tensor, for example, will not vanish, right? If the metric tensor vanishes, then that means the manifold is not singular, because 2 points which are at different distance cannot have zero distance, which are 2 different points cannot have zero distance, okay, if the manifold is not singular. So we cannot say that the metric vanishes in one manifold and not vanishing in the other manifold, and hence the manifolds are distinct. Okay, that is not something that we can compare. So then the question we can ask is, what is the invariant information that we can get out of metric? Okay, out of the tensor that we construct just as the metric. Okay, not its derivatives, but just the metric. And so for that, it's useful to study that given a metric, can you bring it to some standard form? Okay, if there is a standard form in which you can bring a metric by coordinate transformation, then given two manifolds, okay, in each of these two manifolds you bring the metric to the standard form and then you compare. The question is, what is the simplest form that you can, in which you can bring a metric to? Yes, you will see what we can do. You can do more than diagonal. Okay. But diagonalization is one possible thing we can try to do. Okay. Given a metric, you can try to make it diagonal. Okay. Now, when you say that you try to make it diagonal, it's not possible to make the metric diagonal everywhere in general. Okay. But we will just focus on one particular point on the manifold and see what best we can do at that point. Okay. Then you can go to another point and try to repeat the same thing. Okay. So claim, let me first give the claim and then I'll try to prove it. So take some given point, say take some point P. P on the manifold. Okay. And suppose x naught is the coordinate of P in some coordinate system. So the claim is that there is a coordinate transformation that takes x to x prime such that g prime ij of x prime naught is diagonal and each entry of the diagonal is plus or minus 1.
So the plus or minus 1 case is a very specific case. We can diagonalize any matrix,
Yes.
but we cannot always diagonalize it into a plus minus 1 form.
This is a
Yes, that is true, but this is not, we are not diagonalizing, we are making a coordinate transformation.
This is some kind of a row reduced echelon form. Right?
So we will see how to do this. Right? So it's not, diagonalization is, so see, this is different from diagonalization as yet, right? What you are saying is that take any point x naught, okay? We can find a coordinate transformation that brings a metric at that point into this form. Okay, and we will find explicit this as coordinate transformation. Okay, then it will become clear what exactly we are doing.
So we can do it for any point separately. Other
Yes,
points
so
will not
if you go to take another point, right, then the same coordinate transformation is not going to do that. But there is another coordinate transformation which will bring the metric at that point in this form. Okay, so that is the claim. The claim is not that you can find a coordinate system in which the metric takes this form everywhere. Okay, but for every point you can find a coordinate system in which the metric can be brought into this form.
I mean, like,
But for different points, the coordinate transformation is different.
And so that coordinate transformation is a unique transformation. Or you have a many.
No, it's not unique. There are, we'll discuss this. There is a family of coordinate transformations which can do that. Right? And the way to find that is that suppose you have brought the metric into this form, then you can ask, are there coordinate transformations which leave the metric unchanged? Right? So then the coordinate transformation will be unique only after those transformations.
Still we have to compare them because it's not unique. So if you want to compare two manifolds, still when you made the two metrics same at the same point.
Yes. So if you have made the metric the same at the same point, that means the metric cannot distinguish between those manifolds. See, the fact that you can bring the metric to this form doesn't necessarily mean that the manifolds are the same, because you have not made the metric to be identical everywhere, right?
yes.
Okay. But what it says is, it says something negative, that we cannot get any more information about the manifold than just the how many eigenvalues are positive and how many eigenvalues are negative, right, from the metric itself.
If initially that doesn't match, which means that two manifolds are.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have two manifolds, one of which has say all positive, all plus ones here, and another one has some plus one and some minus one, then you know that those manifolds are distinct. Right? But having two manifolds having all plus one doesn't mean that they are the same.
Yes. Yes.
So can you emphasize once more why we are bringing it to the diagonal form?
Why? Well, the point is we need not have brought the diagonal form. We want to bring it to some standard form. Okay, so that two metrics, after bringing to the standard form, if they don't agree, okay, then you know that the manifolds are different.
For that point, P.
Well, the point, as long as the metric differs at any one point, it will be different, right? The manifolds are different. So two manifolds being identical means that there should be a coordinate transform that can bring the metric to be the same at all points. Right? If we can show that at one point they differ, okay, then it's clear that it will be different everywhere. The other point is, of course, that this number, how many pluses, how many plus signs and how many minus signs we have, okay, cannot change from point to point, because then it has to jump discontinuously. Okay, and the metric we are using is continuous function. Okay. So how many positive eigenvalues and how many negative eigenvalues this metric has, okay, is fixed at all points. Right? It's the same for all points as long as it's continuous.
So,
Yes.
as we know that you can always bring any matrix to a row reduced echelon form, which we are going to try to do here by changing coordinate transformation.
Yes.
Can we think in a fashion like we have this metric is a contraction of one row, the matrix, and then one column. So can we think of it as a inverse matrix input of the same system?
No, you don't have to take any inverse. See, we just try to make coordinate transformation.
No.
Right?
What I'm trying to say, it is like one row vector, then a matrix, then a column vector gives me this ds square form.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say that in between this row and column, if we insert two
Some
matrices,
yeah.
which is inverse of each other, which and the one part of the matrix multiplied with this matrix and put it into the row reduced echelon form.
See, the point is, let me emphasize, we are trying to this is not a question of diagonalization. right?
Yeah.
We'll eventually use diagonalization, but ultimately we are trying to make a coordinate transformation,
Yes.
right? Which is different from diagonalization,
Yes. Yes.
right? Not everything that we can do by coordinate transformation is diagonalization.
Yes.
Okay. So what you have to do is to find a coordinate transformation that brings it into this form, right? Now that may use diagonalization as part of it, right? We'll see how we may want to use it. Okay. But right now, don't think of this as a diagonalization. Right? We want to make a coordinate transformation. Right? Just think of it that. And let me write down the coordinate transformation. Then I think it will become clear exactly what we are doing. So, as we discussed yesterday, the coordinate transformation, okay, is a relation between x and x prime. Right? It gives you x's as functions of x prime coordinates or vice versa. X primes as function of the x coordinates. So let's think of this as getting x's as functions of the x prime coordinates. Okay. So then xi is some function of the x primes. Now what we will do is that we will try to expand that relation in a Taylor series expansion around the point x naught. Okay, any function can be Taylor series expanded, right? Around any point. Okay. So we will choose to Taylor series expand around the point x naught. Okay. So the first term in this Taylor series expansion is xi naught. Yeah, because that's the point around which you are expanding. Okay, x naught. Then there will be terms which are linear in x minus x naught. Okay, but of course here there are many variables, so instead of having one term, you will have several terms of this form. A I K x prime I minus
X naught is a point in the prime basis.
x prime. That's correct. Yes.
X naught is a point in the prime coordinate system.
No. X naught is in the unprimed basis. Okay.
Sir, sir, both indices are in the figure.
Let me see. Xi is some function of x prime naught, right? Is you would agree? Now we are saying that we will expand out this function around x prime naught. X prime naught is the point, right? And the physically x prime naught is the coordinate of the point P. Okay, we want to expand it around x prime naught. But when, sorry, this is x prime. When x prime is equal to x prime naught. Okay. So what is Fi of x prime naught? Xi naught by definition, right? Because x prime naught is the coordinate of the point P in the x prime coordinate system, and x naught is the coordinate of the same point in the x coordinate system. So this is nothing but xi naught. Okay, that's the first term I have written. Okay. Then the second term, okay, the first derivative of this function multiplied by x prime k minus x prime k naught. Then there will be term of the form b I j k x prime j, we call it kl, x prime k minus x prime k naught, x prime l minus x prime k naught, and then it goes on. Is this clear? Now we want to know what is g prime at x naught. Okay, so let's write down the formula for g prime. So g prime ij of x prime naught. This is del prime I xk, del prime k xl, gkl. The whole thing evaluated that. X prime, x prime, x prime. or equivalent to x equal, this is the same as x equal to x. Is this point clear? So this, we are evaluating this at x prime equal to x prime naught, right? That is the same as x equal to x naught, because x and x prime are related by this function relationship. So the right hand side has to be evaluated at x equal to x naught, which is equivalent to setting x prime equal to x prime naught. Now we see that this quantity we can calculate from here. Maybe I want to change. Let me change the indices. Okay, just to make life a little simpler. Okay. So I'll call these KL and these are IJ. So this derivative, there is an AIK, that's the first term, and then there will be term involving BIKL times some factor of x prime minus x prime. But all of these factors will vanish when you set x prime equal to x prime naught, right? Because these will have at least one power of x prime minus x prime. Okay. So this then can be written as AIK AJL GLJ of x naught.
So I
IJ
GIG.
sorry GIJ. That's it. Is this okay? We can write it in the matrix notation as A transpose G A, the KL component of this. Okay, I will explain what matrix notation we are using. So A, so first of all G I J is the usual, we regard this as a matrix with I as row, index, J as column index. AIK, again we can regard as a matrix, I as row index and K as column index. So now you see why it's of this form. So AIK GIJ. Okay. So this index, the row index is getting contracted to the row index. Okay. So we have to think of this as A transpose. Okay. So A transpose KI. So A transpose G. This index is fine because the column index is getting contracted to the row index. Okay. So that's why it's A transpose GA. Okay, as a matrix. No, now forget about contravariant covariant, we are just thinking of this as a matrix. Right? Because these are just numbers now, right? AIKs are just a set of numbers, just think of this as a matrix. Because our goal is to show that we can choose A appropriately so that G prime has the diagonal form with all plus minus 1. Is this okay?
So here, just one question, that how we choose our rows and columns accordingly, means which index we will choose as.
Well, this is completely up to us. I mean, I could have also written as a G A transpose. Right? If you take the rows and columns differently, right? Instead of writing A transpose G, I'll write it as A G A transpose. Right? At the end, it makes no difference. Okay, it's just a matter of convention. What you call row and what you call column. Okay, now let's recall that G. So this is all evaluated at x naught, right? So there is no field or anything. It's just at a given point you are evaluating. It's just a set of numbers. So G is a symmetric matrix. Gij was the same as Gji. G is a symmetric matrix, and a symmetric matrix can be diagonalized. Okay. So G I can write as S GD S transpose, where S satisfies, or let me write it as S transpose S GS. So S satisfies S transpose S equal to identity. It is orthogonal matrix. Okay, symmetric, real symmetric matrix can be diagonalized by orthogonal matrix. Okay. This one has the form lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda n. These are all zeros. Okay, so in other words, you can always find an S with this property. Okay, so as an S transpose, G is equal to S transpose GDS. Okay, GD is the diagonal matrix. Is this point clear? Now let's introduce another matrix, R. So R, which is the same as R transpose, is defined to the matrix square root of mod lambda 1, square root of mod lambda 2, up to square root of mod lambda n.
Sorry, sir, please tell us.
This one? This is just a definition. I am introducing a matrix R, okay, which is diagonal, and its entries are square root of mod lambda 1. Lambda 1 is this, these eigenvalues. Lambda 1 could be positive or negative, right? Okay, so this is square root of mod lambda 1. Okay. Now I am assuming that none of the eigenvalues are 0. Okay. Because if the eigenvalue, if the matrix has a 0 eigenvalue, right, that would mean that it's singular, because you can displace in one direction and the distance is 0.
Yes.
And we don't want such eigenvalues of the matrix. So we are assuming all eigenvalues non-zero. Okay, and hence this makes sense. So now we see that we can now write this matrix, this diagonal matrix, as R transpose R. R transpose is the same as R. Okay, you could have written it as R square, but I write it as R transpose times R. So you conclude from here that G can be written as S transpose GD S, which in turn is S transpose R transpose, and then this, sorry, these are R transpose R. This is R transpose eta R. Okay, I'll write what eta is. So eta is the matrix lambda 1 over mod lambda 1, lambda 2 over mod lambda 2, lambda n over mod lambda n. Okay, this is in fact the crucial point, because when you multiply by R transpose and R, okay, you get mod lambda 1, mod lambda 2 up to mod lambda n. Okay, so you have to make this into lambda 1, lambda 2 up to lambda n. So you have to take this eta, which is lambda 1 over mod lambda 1. This picks up the signs of the lambdas. Is this clear? Because R transpose R, if eta we had ignored, you would just get diagonal with only mod lambdas. Okay, that's not what you want. You want the lambdas. So this has the structure that we mentioned earlier. diagonal with all plus or minus 1. Okay, eta is the one which has only plus minus 1 in the diagonal end. So I write the S transpose R transpose eta RS. So G prime KL X prime naught is A transpose G A KL. So which now using this I can write as A transpose S transpose R transpose eta RS KL. It is clear. I am just using this equation to get in this form. So now you recall that A was completely arbitrary. It was up to us to choose A, right? Because we are allowed any coordinate transformation that we like. Right? And we are trying to find a coordinate transformation that makes the metric as simple as possible. So what should we do now? What is it that makes the metric as simple as possible? Right? What choice of A should we make? Yes?
What choice of A should be made?
Yeah. Yes?
RS.
RS inverse. See, if you make A to be RS inverse, right, then you are done.
Because eta will be goodness element.
Yeah, so eta will be just plus minus 1 plus minus 1. Right. So we pick A to be RS inverse. So choose A equal to RS inverse, and this basically means that G KL of G prime KL of X prime naught is just eta KL. Okay, which is a diagonal matrix with entries either plus or minus 1.
This is why it is not unique. We can choose any size.
Well, when you write A equal to RS inverse, of course it looks like a unique A.
No, means I'm saying that in general the coordinate transformation that we do
Yes,
is that from taking the xi naught plus ai,
yes,
there our choice of A is up to us. So that
yes, it was up to us, exactly. But the question was whether there is a unique A which brings a metric into this form.
Because we can in principle choose some coordinate transformation which keeps eta to eta.
So what is that coordinate transformation? What can you do with A, right? We are saying if you are saying that if A is not unique, right? So A is, we choose here A to be RS inverse, right?
S can change.
Yes?
S can change obviously.
S can change, okay? So how can S change? What can you do to S?
S the diagonalizing
so
matrix.
S is the diagonalizing matrix, yes?
So S will be unique, right?
S is in
For next point, S will be unique matrix to diagonalize G.
Okay, so S is unique. Okay, so there is a differing opinion it looks like. So suppose S is unique, right? Then what can you do?
S will be different for different points.
We are-
No, we are now looking at one point.
At one point.
Yes. Right? The question we are asking is very specific. This matrix A that we have chosen, right? A we took to be RS inverse. Okay, this does the job. Okay. Is there any other matrix which will do the job?
so if it's a orthogonal A is orthogonal
A is
orthogonal.
S is the diagonalizing matrix.
S to is A.
A equal to R is inverse.
So
yes.
anyone which if R transpose eta is like
A orthogonal would be.
Any orthogonal transformation.
Yeah.
Eta
So
is-
the point is, okay, let's look at this. We want. So suppose you have chosen this, right? So now the question is, could you have altered this matrix RS? Okay, because A is RS inverse, right? Could you have altered this matrix RS, keeping this structure? and that means that, so what, suppose eta was identity, okay, then you could have multiplied by any orthogonal matrix, okay, and its transpose, right? So I could have taken A to be not RS but A to be, instead of RS inverse I could have taken to be, let's see,
Some RSO.
U RS inverse, okay, while U is an orthogonal matrix, right?
Yes.
Because then that will just multiply U transpose eta. Suppose eta had 1 minus 1 eigenvalue and all plus 1
Then it will be Lorentz.
then it will be Lorentz matrix.
Lorentz matrix.
Right? So similarly, if you have test 2 positive and 2 negative and other positive eigenvalues, there is an appropriate matrix that you can multiply it by. So this is the reason why this transformation is not unique. Okay? There is a freedom that you can use, which basically keeps eta unchanged. Is this clear? Okay. You can also see by parameter term. Gij has how many independent components?
Independent component.
Yes. It's symmetric, right?
N into N plus 1 by 2.
N into N plus 1 by 2, right? Gij has N into N plus 1 by 2, and you are trying to bring all of those into some standard form, right? This one has no parameter. This final form eta has no parameter, right?
Yes.
So you want to basically get rid of all those N into N plus 1 by 2 variables, right? And you are using Aij to do that. Aij has how many independent components? Aij has n square independent components because Aij has no symmetry requirement, right?
Yes.
So n square is larger than n into n plus 1 by 2. Right? By how much?
N square minus N.
N into N
It is N into N minus 2, N minus 1 by 2.
So the difference is n into n minus 1 by 2. Okay, n square minus n into n plus 1 by 2 is n into n minus 1 by 2. Right? And what is n into n minus 1 by 2?
It's an antisymmetric matrix.
The antisymmetric matrix, that's the number of parameters that orthogonal matrix has.
Yes.
Right? So that's one way to see that basically the only freedom that you have left over
Is orthogonal.
is an orthogonal matrix. Right? Because that has exactly the extra number of parameters which you have left in A. Right? A has n square parameters, so clearly you don't need n square parameters to satisfy n into n plus 1 by 2 conditions. Right?
Aren't we allowing for complex numbers in this case?
Complex numbers, no, we are not allowing, because you don't want coordinate transforms which are complex, right? Our coordinates are all real.
So once we get a signature that is fixed, we cannot alter that.
That's right. So you cannot alter that. Okay. So this basically shows that if we are constructing tensors out of the metric, not its derivatives, okay, then the only invariant information that you can get about a manifold is its signature. Okay, how many positive eigenvalues and how many negative eigenvalues that it has. Okay. If all eigenvalues are positive, then you call the manifold Euclidean. If one eigenvalue is negative, the rest are positive, then you call it Lorentzian. Okay, those are the only two cases that will be relevant for us. Okay, but mathematically, of course, you can also construct manifolds which have two negative signatures, two negative eigenvalues and rest positive eigenvalues and so on. Is this okay? So the bottom line is that the metric contains some information about the manifold. Okay, the tensor is constructed out of the metric. Okay. But if you are only using metric, okay, and not its derivatives to construct tensors, then the information that you get is not very much. Okay, the only invariant information that you can get is the signature. So the goal then is to try to use derivatives of the metric to see if we can construct tensors which are more useful. Okay, for example, this information, okay, eta, will not distinguish between the surface of a two-dimensional sphere for which you constructed a metric and a two-dimensional flat Euclidean space. Okay, both have signature plus plus. So we have to find some other tensor which can distinguish between these two cases. Okay, which then will tell us that it's impossible to find a coordinate transformation that takes one to the other.
So this check is only for the signature.
Yeah, so just the metric, if you use metric as a tensor, then local information, right, at any given point, right, the only information that you can get by looking at that is the signature. So you can also see that this is more than diagonalization, right? Because diagonalization we have only used orthogonal matrix. Okay, but A is more than an orthogonal matrix, right? It has more freedom, and that's what we are using to make all of these equal to 1 or minus 1.
Sir, why a matrix cannot change its signature in the whole
Why it cannot change its signature?
signature?
Well, the point is signature is more a topological information, because once you have fixed certain number of positive and negative eigenvalues, it's true the same number holds for all points in the manifold. Okay? Because it cannot change it, otherwise it has to jump discontinuously.
Okay, it has to go to 0 and then.
Exactly. If the metric is continuous,
Okay.
okay, then the signature has to be continuous, has to be invariant. Okay? Otherwise it has to pass through 0. Some of the eigenvalues, if you have to change sign, it has to pass through 0. And once it reaches 0, then that's a singular metric. Okay, so let's try derivatives. Is this visible? I mean, this is okay, right? So let's look at the simplest possible thing. Kijk, okay, this is the definition. Just okay, derivative of Gk with respect to xi. So this looks like has a chance of being tensor. It has 3 index. Okay, so it looks like a covariant rank 3 tensor. But of course, having 3 index downstairs doesn't make it necessarily a covariant rank 3 tensor. You have to check whether it transforms correctly. And for that, you have to calculate del prime. So k prime. Okay, let me write it as I1, I2, I3. K prime I1, I2, I3 is del prime I1 G prime I2, I3 of x prime. And now you have to relate it to k, okay, to check if it's really a tensor or not. And that you can do because you know how to relate g prime to g. So I can write this as del prime of I1 times del prime I2 of x j2 del prime I3 x j3 of g j2 j3 x. Okay. So this has several cases. So del prime I2 x j2 del prime I3 x j3 del prime I1 g j2 x plus 2 more terms. So write one line. So del prime I1 del prime I2 x j2 del prime I3 x j3 g x plus now this line, the first line, is what we really want. Okay, and to see this, we can use chain rule to write it in the following way. So del prime I2 xj2, del prime I3 xj3. Here you have del prime I1, but I will want to convert this into derivative with respect to x by using chain rule. So I can write this as del prime I1 xj1 times del j1 gj to j3. Okay, if it's a little unfamiliar, you can expand this out. This is del x j1, del x prime I1, del j2 j3, del x j1. Okay, then that this is the same as del x prime I1 of gj to j3, which we had here. So this quantity is exactly what you want, because this is del prime I1 xj1. I am just writing it in the front. Del prime I2 xj2, del prime I3 xj3 times k I1 prime k j1 j2 j3 x. Okay, because del j1 j2 j3 x is k j1 j2 j3 of x. So this is what you want. Okay? If k, in order to prove that k is a tensor, we want that k prime I1, I2, I3 should be given by this. But now we see that there are these two more terms sitting in the second and third term. Okay, these are some things that you don't want. But under a general coordinate transformation, these are not zero. Okay, these will vanish only if the coordinate transformation is linear. Okay, but not under a general coordinate transformation. So if x is the general function of x prime, then this is non-zero, and that means, that shows that k is not a tensor. Okay, it doesn't transform correctly under a general coordinate transformation. Is this clear? Now the fact that k is not a tensor, okay, is not immediately problematic, because we could think of not k but some linear combinations of k, okay, or even polynomials in k, okay, to construct a tensor out of it. Right? Maybe you can take linear combinations of polynomials to cancel these extra terms. So the question is it possible to do such things? Okay? Take linear combinations of polynomials of k to actually construct a tensor out of it. Okay? We are not exploring right now, adding more derivatives, which we will do slowly. Okay? But just for the first derivative of the metric, which is encoded in k, could we construct a tensor? Okay? That's the question you want to ask. But the answer, unfortunately, is that it's not possible. Okay? And the way we can show that it's not possible is to show that it is possible to choose a coordinate system in which k is identically 0 at a given point. Okay, just like we brought metric to be the standard form at any given point. What one can show is that given a point on the manifold, it is always possible to find a coordinate transformation so that k vanishes. Now if k vanishes, that means that any tensor that you might have constructed by taking linear combinations of polynomials in k must also vanish identically. Okay? Because a tensor is by assumption constructed out of k and its polynomials and its powers. Okay? So any tensor that you could construct out of k, if such a tensor existed, would vanish at that point. Okay? But that means that it will vanish in any coordinate frame. Right? If a tensor vanishes in one coordinate system, it vanishes in all coordinate system. And this argument can be repeated at every point. right? At different points, of course, you have to choose different coordinate system. But for given any point, you can find a coordinate system in which k vanishes, and hence in that coordinate system the tensor vanishes. But tensors transform simply under a coordinate transformation. So once the tensor vanishes, then it vanishes in all coordinate terms. So this is the argument. But of course, this argument requires that you have to prove that it is possible to find a coordinate system in which k vanishes. Okay, but first you have to see if the logic is clear, that how we are proposing to go about proving this result. Is this clear? Okay. So if we can show that it is possible to find a coordinate system in which we can make k vanish at a given point, then you are done. Right? Then you have shown that it is impossible to find a tensor out of only first derivatives of the metric. So let's try the coordinate transformation again. The same coordinate transformation that we had used earlier. Say xi. Okay. We will again expand it around. Taylor series expand around the point x naught. So x naught I plus eij x naught j. Sorry, xj x prime j minus x prime j naught plus e a x prime j minus x prime k minus x prime plus
So, suppose we are given two metric and
Yes.
asked to find that whether they belong to the same manifold, they can be related to the product operation. So we can go to, we can find the coordinate system where this vanishes, this k vanishes
at a given point.
at
Yes.
a given point, and from the same point and same coordinate transformation, if the other also vanishes, then can we say that they are related?
No, but for two manifolds being equal doesn't mean that it has to have the same coordinate transformation, right? See, suppose you have another coordinate transformation. Because two manifolds being equal doesn't mean that see, if they are already given in the same coordinate system, then of course the matrix will be the same. Right? So the main non-trivial part of this analysis is that they may be related by coordinate transformation. So a given coordinate transformation may bring one metric in the standard form. It's not necessary that the same coordinate transformation will also bring the other metric in the standard form. Right? Because then they would have been equal from the beginning. Okay, so again we use the same coordinate transformation. Okay, and we have to see the relationship between k prime and k. Okay, in particular we are trying to make. Now you see that k prime depends on the second derivative of x. Okay. K prime depends on second derivative of x, which basically means that k prime will get contribution from these. Okay? Because you have to take the second derivative and evaluate it at x naught. Okay? Last time for the metric, these terms are not relevant, right? Because you took first derivative and evaluated at x naught. Okay? That vanished. But now we are using second derivative, so you can use these. Okay? The hard terms are not relevant. So now let's just count how many equations you are trying to solve and how many constants you have at our disposal. So how many equations are you trying to solve? We want to make k prime ijk equal to 0. That's how many conditions. If we want k prime ijk equal to 0.
Symmetric in J and K.
Yes, so it's symmetric in J and K.
So it is n square time n into n plus 1 by 2.
No, not n square. jk can take how many values?
N into n plus 1 by
n into n plus 1 by 2. times
So
I
that is
can
n.
take n values.
Yes, that's n into n square into n plus 1 by 2.
Yeah, n square into n plus 1 by 2. Right? These many equations are what we are trying to satisfy. Because we want all components of k prime ijk to be 0 at x prime naught. How many constants do you have? N cube. Think carefully. I can take how many values? N values. These?
Same.
Yes, symmetric.
See, because it has to be symmetric, right? The antisymmetric part of this doesn't contribute because it's contracting with the same,
Yes,
right?
symmetric.
So JK is symmetric.
Yeah, it is exactly the same number.
So it's exactly the same. So this is n times n into n plus 1 by 2 constants.
Something like this.
So at least as far as the parameter count is concerned, we see that we have enough number of constants to set all components of k prime ijk to 0. Is this clear? And I'll leave it as an exercise to find the ijk explicitly to make k prime ijk equal to 0. Okay, it's a straightforward exercise. Yeah, we know the transformation laws. Okay, k prime ijk is given here. Okay, you substitute that transformation law there. Okay, you will get some equation, and you should be able to explicitly construct k prime ijk in terms of the original k ijk.
Like that we have the same number of constants, does it make this unique?
Yes. So the point is k ijks are the b ijks will be unique. Okay, because you have exactly the same number of constants as you had the as the number of equations.
But the higher order terms are not.
Higher order terms don't contribute because the third term, this has 3 parts of x minus x naught, right? X prime minus x prime naught. Okay. After you have taken 2 derivatives, you are supposed to set x prime equal to x prime naught.
So still there is not a unique transformation.
Oh, the transformation is not unique, but this is unique. The b is unique. Okay? Higher order terms because it's not even sensitive to higher order terms, right? So those can be arbitrary. Is this clear? So single derivatives are not very useful.
So the idea is basically to find out the transformation rule from x prime to x
Yes.
and see that they must have more number of degrees of freedom than what we have for the tensors we get. Like for Gijk, we have seen
That we have, well, this is the other way. You have to make sure that there are more constraints than the number of parameters
Yes,
you
yes,
have.
yeah.
Right? Because only then you can say that you cannot set all of them to 0.
Yes. Yes.
Right? So if at some point you find that the number of constants is becoming more than the number of variables that you can adjust, okay, to bring it to some standard form, then you know that it's possible that there is a possibility that you can find some tensor.
Sir, we are multiplying by a single derivative also. The double derivative we are multiplying by single derivative.
That's
Shouldn't
right.
there be some aij with also multiplying bij?
That is true. There is a single derivative, but upon multiplication by aij's, right, if something is 0, then multiplication by aij will not make it non-zero, and vice versa.
Yes, sir, but while counting parameters,
Yes.
should I not count for both, matlab both multiplication of both aij and bij?
Okay. The point is that the aij's cannot be used to set something to be 0 from non-zero value,
Yes.
right? So if you want to make this k prime to be 0, right, then the only thing that you can make use of is the b's. Okay, you can think of it in the following way. Imagine that you have made them small. Okay, and now you are trying to make them to be 0. Okay, these terms, the single derivative terms, right, which are, for example, coming as multiplicative factor. These multiplying a small number will give a small number. You can never make it 0 because the aij's are non-singular matrices. Okay, so if you want to try to make the if you are trying to say how many ways you can, whether you can make the k primes to 0, okay, then A's are not going to help at all. Right? So you can imagine that you have the fixed the A's once and for all, okay, and you want to see whether the B's can be used to set them to 0. Okay. Now particularly after you have set them to 0, you can make A transformations. Okay. It will leave 0 as 0. But A cannot make a non-zero value to 0 and vice versa. Okay. So when you are trying to see if it's possible to make these coefficients 0, okay, then you can just forget about the A's. I mean, intuitively also it's clear. We saw that what the A's do, right? After you have brought the metric in the standard form, A's are just rotations or Lorentz transformations. Right? So acting on a tensor, a rotational Lorentz transformation, right? Constant rotational Lorentz transformation, will rotate it, will mix various indices, but it cannot make a non-zero index to 0, a non-zero tensor to 0 and vice versa. So for counting purpose, it's enough to count just the means. Okay, so let's go ahead then and do it for two derivatives. So are there any questions at this point?
For a tensor, it is sufficient if in some particular coordinate.
Yes.
If I make it 0 at some one point,
Yes.
then it will be 0
At that point.
At that point in all
All coordinate system.
Sir, but shouldn't I be showing that in some particular frame it should be 0 everywhere? Then it will be
Yeah, but it follows. So now the logic goes as follows. So let me repeat this because it's important and we'll be using it again and again. Okay. That imagine that x naught is an arbitrary point. Okay. Given x naught, what you have shown is that it is possible to choose a coordinate system that makes the tensor at x naught 0.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now you choose another coordinate system, okay, in which these b's are completely arbitrary, right? These have not been chosen that way. But if it is a tensor, then once it's 0 at x naught in one coordinate system, it will always remain 0. Okay. Now you go to another point. Okay. In the original coordinate system, right, at that point we have not made any special arrangement. But now the point is at that point you can choose another coordinate system, okay, in which these things vanish, and hence the tensor, okay, will vanish in that new coordinate system, not in the same coordinate system but in the new coordinate system. That's what it proved. But once you have proven that the tensor vanishes in this new coordinate system, we also know that it must vanish in the original coordinate system, where the tensor transforms as tensor, right? Transforms multiplicatively. So in order to show that the tensor vanishes, okay, it's enough that you take point by point, and each point you choose your coordinate system specific to that point, so that the tensor vanishes, and then you are guaranteed that it vanishes in all coordinate frames.
At all points.
And at all points, because you can, this point that you have chosen is completely arbitrary. You chose an arbitrary point on the manifold, and at that point, specific to that point, you found a coordinate system in which the tensor vanishes. Okay. That is good enough.
Sir, first I choose some frame of reference.
Yes.
Some particular point.
Yes.
And I found it is 0. Then it is 0 in all the frame of reference.
Exactly.
When I am seeing some other point,
Yes.
and I am putting some other transformation, that can make the previous one non-zero.
No, because tensors don't transform. The tensor transformation laws are such that if it is 0 to begin with, it always remains 0. Because tensor transformation law is multiplicative, right? So if all components are 0 on one side, right, after multiplying and summing, you will not get a non-zero result. If it was non-zero, its value can change. But if it's 0, it remains 0. Right? So that's the argument. So vanishing of the tensor is easy to show because you can choose your frame according to your wish.
Sir, when we are arguing that tensor is when it's 0 in one frame of reference, it will be 0 in all frame of reference because it is multiplying with some constant that derivatives.
Not constant, they are functions in general.
Functions, sir. So, but when we said that one metric in different coordinates, in one coordinate frame it can have singularity, in another one it might not have singularity.
Yes.
Then the transformation must be singular.
Yeah, so you are assuming that you are not using singular metric, right? You are always assuming that you are choosing coordinate system in which the metric is non-singular.
Yes, sir.
Right? If there is a coordinate singularity, right, what you are saying is that if there is a coordinate singularity, then that something the tensor may appear as vanishing, right, even though it's not really 0. Okay. But at a generic point, you don't consider coordinate singularities. Okay. So this analysis is valid as long as the coordinate system that you have chosen is non-singular.
So it's still the
Singular coordinate transformation, okay, then you have to be a little more careful in identifying whether 0 really means 0 or not. But as long as the coordinate system is non-singular, okay, then going from one non-singular coordinate system to another non-singular coordinate system cannot make 0 tensor to non-zero tensor. Okay. So singular cases we will discuss later when the need arises. Right? Right now, let's not worry about singular coordinates. Right? Let's assume that you are working with non-singular coordinate system. Right? So all these arguments are valid in non-singular coordinate systems.
So once we bring the k to 0,
Yes.
then the logic what follows?
Because the tensor we have assumed is constructed out of linear combinations of k and its powers, right? So the tensor component will vanish identically.
So the tensor will be 0.
So once the tensor, all tensor components vanish at x naught, right? Then it's 0 in that frame, right? And because tensors transform as tensors, right? Homogeneously, it will be 0 in all frames, all coordinate system. So that's the logic. That to show that tensor vanishes, and it's enough to show that it's 0 in one coordinate frame. Any other questions?
KIJK is still not a tensor.
Pardon?
KIJK.
No, so KIJK is not a tensor field, clearly. KIJK, of course, we know is not a tensor field. But the worry was that maybe if KIJK is not a tensor field, we can still take linear combinations to construct tensor fields. Right?
That we are doing very specific.
Yeah, so we are ruling this out by this argument. That assuming that there is a tensor field, right? So it's like you are assuming that there is a tensor field and then showing that there is a contradiction. Okay? Let's assume that there is some kind of tensor that you can construct out of KIJK and its linear combinations and possibly its powers. Okay? If there is such a tensor, okay, then its transformation law is homogeneous. Okay? So if it vanishes in one frame, it will vanish in all frames. Okay? And then we are showing that it is always possible to find some coordinate system in which KIJK vanishes, and hence the tensor, because it's by the assumption it's constructed out of linear combinations of KIJK and its powers, the tensor vanishes, okay, and hence it must vanish in all frames. Is this okay? Now let's take two derivatives. So let's call this S I J K L as and again it's easy to see that this is by itself not a tensor. Okay, but what we are asking is is it possible to construct a tensor out of its linear combinations and polynomials and so on. So we follow the same strategy. Let's suppose that it is possible to find a tensor out of its linear combinations and polynomials. We can rule that out if we can show that there is a coordinate transformation that makes this vanish. Is this clear? At some point x naught. Okay, and then you can repeat it for every point x naught. So you just count. How many parameters does it have? How many independent components will this have at x naught?
N into n plus 1.
Yes. N into
For
n
del
plus
I
1.
del j, n into n plus 1. For g KL, that is also by 2. For g KL also, it is n into n plus 1. But they are symmetric among themselves.
Yeah. So scale is symmetric. So n into n plus 1 by 2, and this is symmetric n into n plus 1 by 2. Right? There is no symmetry that exchanges this with this. Yeah. So this is the total number of components that you have to set to 0. So if you have to make all components 0. Now, which of these coefficients are going to help us in doing that?
C.
The C, the next term, right?
Yes.
So plus C I J K L x prime j minus x prime j not, well, I will not write it down, you can guess what the things are, right? Three factors, x prime j minus x prime j naught, x prime k minus x prime k naught, and x prime l minus x prime l naught. Is clear? And it should be clear that the transformation law of S is going to involve the C's. Because two derivatives of G, right? G transformation already involves one derivative. And now we have two more derivatives on it. Okay, so altogether 3 derivatives will act, which will kill these 3 x minus x naught. Okay, so C I J K L will enter, but higher powers will not enter. So how many such C I J K Ls do we have?
It's symmetric in J, K and L.
So it's symmetric in J, K and L. Right?
I is independent. So I gives me a N.
Okay. So number of parameters. N times
Kn will give me n into n plus 1 by 2, and that will symmetric with J.
Yes, so J, K is completely symmetric in J, K and L.
Yes.
Do you know what is the number?
N plus 1 and plus 2.
Yes, n into
N into
N plus 1
into n plus 2 by 6.
and plus 2.
by 6. This is familiar? If you have 3 objects and you are trying to make symmetric combination, yeah, it's n into n plus 1 times n plus 2 by 2 by 6. Is that familiar? Right? Well, not NC3. NC3 will be anti-symmetric combination. Right? This is symmetric combination. So you have to do this count. You have to put boxes. I mean, you will probably do it in statistical mechanics. Like, I mean, to count that how many ways you can pick 3 objects, right? But you can repeat.
This is basically symmetric polynomial third order sum.
Yeah. So
Q plus 2Q.
I mean, you can also do by examples. Right? If you have 4 objects, right? How many ways you can choose 3 things which are completely symmetric in 3 index, right? And this is the number. Okay, I'll leave it as an exercise to count this. But now we ask the question that which one is bigger?
Minus
This is bigger or this is bigger?
the upper one.
Upper one is bigger?
Yes.
Yeah, it has a 4 in the denominator, this has a 6 in the denominator, right? Both goes roughly as n to the 4. Okay. So the upper one is bigger, okay, which means that you are trying to satisfy more constraints than the number of variables we have.
So we can.
So that is not possible in general.
Yes.
So this means that it is not possible in general to adjust the C's to set all components of Sij to 0. And this means that there is a hope that this contains some invariant information about the metric. In fact, it does contain some invariant information about the metric, because if it didn't contain any invariant information, you should be able to set it to 0. So let's count how many independent informations you have. That's the difference between these two numbers. Right? There are certain number of these you can set to 0 using this, but the others you cannot set to 0. Okay. So that's number of independent components which cannot be set to 0. So that number is the difference, that's n square into n plus 1 square by 4 minus n square n plus 1 n plus 2 by 6, and this I think is 112 n square times n square and so on. So in one dimension, if n is 1, then this is still 0. Okay, in fact, one dimension, the Riemannian manifold is always equivalent to just Euclidean Riemannian manifold, right? You consider it continues even to higher derivatives. There is no information in the metric at all. Okay, you can just set it equal to 1 or minus 1. But from 2 dimensions onwards, we see that this number is non-zero, and hence there is some non-trivial information about the manifold in the second derivative. Right? Roughly, we can say that we should be able to construct a tensor out of the second derivatives, which has these many independent components. Right? Because these many components you cannot set to 0. Okay, so the tensor should have these many independent components. Okay, labeling it. So this number, for example, is 1 for n equal to 2. For n equal to 2 is 4 times 3, yes, that's 1. I think it's 6 for n equal to 3.
And 20 for n equal to
And 20 for n equal to 4. And you can go on. Okay. So we should be able to construct tensors with 2 derivatives of the metric with these many components in different dimensions. Any questions? Okay. So let me write down the expression for the tensor, and then I'll leave as an exercise to find its transformation laws. So we define gamma on jk of okay, this is known as a Christoffel symbol, or sometimes you want to call it connection. This of course cannot be a tensor, it's clear, because it's constructed out of only single derivatives and linear combinations of single derivatives. So this is not a tensor, but it still plays a useful role, as we will see. But using this gamma, we can define Rijkl, which is so all repeated indices are sound. So I'll leave it as an exercise to check the following. First, gamma prime LMN X prime is Okay, it's straightforward. You just have to look at the transformation laws of these, which we already wrote down, and then take appropriate linear combinations to get this.
So what about this index?
This is L N.
This should be
This should be.
in.
Oh, this should be. So is the statement clear? Okay, is it clear what you have to prove? Okay, take this expression for gamma, substitute prime for all of this. Okay, this is G prime, this is L prime, this is G prime, and so on. Express everything in terms of unprimed variables. Okay, using the relationship between G prime and G, and also using chain rule, you can convert the derivative with respect to prime variables to derivative with respect to unprimed variables. And after some algebra, you should reach this. And you see that this is not a tensor because of this term. Okay. The first line, if this term, second line had been absent, then this would be exactly the way a tensor transforms. But the second line makes it not a tensor. And so using this gamma, we can now construct something which really transforms as a tensor. That is R I J K L
So you have written.
Oh, I have written down? Oh, yeah. So, the second exercise is to check that R I J K L is the tensor of rank 1. So this is known as the Christoffel symbol. Gamma is known as the also connection, and this is the Riemann tensor. This has various symmetries, okay, which we will discuss. And using those symmetries, one can check that the number of independent components that it has is exactly what we found: 112 n square times n square minus 1 independent components. Which basically will show that there is nothing else you can construct. Okay? This is the only this contains all the invariant information that you have in the theory for which second derivatives are metric. You can ask whether it is possible to construct things out of higher derivatives. Okay, we will discuss this later. Okay, but effectively we don't really get very much more looking at higher derivatives. You basically get derivatives of Riemann tensor, okay, or what we will call covariant derivatives of Riemann tensor, and we will discuss what those are.
So we are not going to higher derivatives because Ri, if two R's are same, then R manifold are same, is it like that? Or
Yes, basically the two Riemann tensors can be converted to each other by coordinate transformation. Then the manifolds are the same. The higher derivative, we can ask whether it is possible to construct higher tensors out of higher derivatives for a metric. Right? But what we will find is that those tensors, okay, generally one can prove that any tensor that you might construct out of higher derivatives for a metric can be obtained as derivatives of the Riemann tensor, appropriate covariant derivatives of Riemann tensor, right, which preserve the tensor structure. So Riemann tensor and its derivatives, covariant derivatives, basically determine all the invariant quantities about the manifold. Okay, so I think I'll stop here today, and tomorrow we'll start. Discuss more properties of the Riemannian manifold. Okay, some more details on the properties of the Riemannian manifolds. But please try to do these exercises, okay, because unless you do it yourself, it will never become clear what exactly it means.